In the infamous New York Times opinion piece titled "Recycling is Garbage," John Tierney wrote, "The only resource that has been getting consistently more expensive is human time. The cost of labor has been rising for centuries. An hour of labor today buys a larger quantity of energy or raw materials than ever before. To economists, it's wasteful to expend human labor to save raw materials that are cheap today and will probably be cheaper tomorrow." Tierney's article broke the New York Times record for hate mail, the op-ed clearly striking a nerve which many individuals care deeply about. It is this nerve which Piet Hein Eek has so carefully measured and mastered in his design work, challenging himself to defy typical economics by rearranging the value of labor and materials. He says, "A basic economic principle of modern society is that the less labor you use, the more money you save. But I thought I would turn that around, using the materials that people throw away, and adding as much labor as possible to them. Ultimately, people notice all the attention that goes into making the pieces." In the race to work as little as possible for as much money as possible, less and less attention is paid to materials, and residual materials are often written off as waste. I figured I'd turn the whole thing around instead. Materials are invaluable, and work is free. This way you get to spend as much time as you want. Examples of Hein Eek's work, which depicts this philosophy, include his scrapwood series, with classic cupboards, chairs, and tables built out of carefully selected pieces of scrap wood; his tubes furniture, built from old pipes salvaged from the building Hein Eek's firm bought and renovated; design of pipe, with upholstery taken from old awnings; and chunky beam, inspired by a large number of beams he purchased, but then didn't know what to do with. This back-to-basics design, as Hein Eek explains, in all its simplicity, is the result of a rather long process of designing, experimenting, and producing. But this is not all that Hein Eek chooses to spend his time exploring. In a recent interview, he stated, "The material is the most important element of every project. If you treat it well, in some way it will reciprocate your affection." His box within a box within a box is a representation of that philosophy. He says, "By sawing off a slice around the wood each time, and then shaping the slices and gluing them back together, you can make quite a few boxes with the only material loss being the saw cuts. Creating something without material loss, or, alternatively, from waste, is one of my strongest drives. This originates from a profound love and respect for materials in general." In his explorations of materials, Hein Eek, in his own words, found it absolutely fascinating to try to construct with clay as I would with sheet metal. I immediately put together a cup with handle to see if it was possible. He continued these explorations with jugs and pitchers. He says, "When we tried to make pitchers, the clay turned out to be too weak and the whole thing collapsed. It was possible, however, to do this using metal molds as a sort of scaffolding. The molds we created turned out to be products in themselves." With this understanding of Hein Eek's philosophy, I started my exploration by seeing what I could find around BYU which was considered waste. I found random wooden scraps, broken and ill-formed concrete, plastic, cord, lots of cardboard, including some really interesting super thick cardboard, broken pottery, rusty metal scrap, long thin sheet metal slices, broken PVC pipe, wire, and a mason jar. In this exploration, I found it interesting to discover what actually was going to waste and what was not. For example, plastic flash in the plastics lab and extra aluminum in the forge are simply reheated and used again with almost no waste. On the other hand, highly manufactured materials such as PVC pipe and cardboard, or unique one-of-a-kind objects like oddly shaped pieces of scrap wood, were the most common waste items. It seems Hein Eek has focused on these sorts of items, these items which have already been used up and seem to be good for nothing more than the landfill, in his designs. Seeking to treat these materials I had gathered affectionately, I explored their properties to see what could be useful in a birdhouse. First, I explored using a welded steel frame piece as the basis for a birdhouse, using a piece of red sheet metal as the roof, and some wood veneers as the walls. Hein Eek's designs are often material translations of familiar objects. For example, his chunky beam chair standing in for the classic overstuffed chair. I was curious if the sheet metal and veneers could make a birdhouse translation of the classic red barn. Continuing, I explored using the wood scraps to construct a sort of Lincoln log style birdhouse, with the veneers simulating the shingle roof. However, it felt too refined, as if the materials used to build it were meant to be used in that way. Hein Eek's scrap designs have materials which maintain their identity as scrap, The color of the scrap wood doesn't match, the pipes still are oddly colored and rusty, etc. This log house didn't match that. Seeking to use a material which retained a memory of its prior purpose, I turned to the pottery scraps which I had gathered. I discovered an interesting array of colors, textures, and shapes, and when I handled them, I discovered them all to be very soft to the touch. Sharp edges would give way to soft powder at the slightest touch, creating a very nice surface. I realized that if I broke up the pottery pieces further, I could use them as a sort of ground surface or floor for the birdhouse, a soft, warm, inviting place to build a nest. Seeking to create some sort of covering or shelter for the birdhouse, I explored the sheet metal strips. I discovered them to be made of a very soft and flexible metal, maybe tin, I'm not sure. However, I realized they were flexible enough to weave into a sort of mat, which made them into a much more useful form. However, as they provided no protection from the elements, I moved on. Looking at the mason jar, I realized that it could serve as the container in which I could use my pottery floor. Glass, of course, is the drink container material which has the greatest apparent worth to the user. While one may throw away a plastic bottle or aluminum can without thinking, I always hesitate to toss a glass bottle. Taking inspiration from a light fixture which Hein Eek designed, I added a wooden baseboard and a wire cage to complete the design, using materials which are clearly in their second life to create a simple, elegant, visually interesting form. I feel this is a birdhouse that Piet Hein Eek could have designed.